start in about 1 minute. Okay, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. It is my privilege to have a conversation with Yawa Hansen-Quao. Yawa splits her time actually between Seattle and Ghana, so it is quite a privilege to have you with us today. Thank you, Yawa. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then go into our conversation, but Yawa's full bio is in Huba, so I encourage you to go and look at her full bio. But Yawa is a Ghanaian author, a social entrepreneur, and an advocate. She's a graduate of Ashesi University and now is on the board of directors. She is also part of the African Leadership Network and the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers. And she's just a force of nature. If you've ever heard her speak, just such an inspiration. So thank you, Yawa, for being with us here today.
Thank you, Kristen. It's such an honor to join you.
Thank you. So let's get started. I thought we would just open up and you could just tell us a little bit more about your personal background and what set you on this path of being this author and social entrepreneur that you are.
Well, I am what you might call a multicultural African. My family is from Ghana, and formative years of my life were spent in the US. My father was a politician during the time that a military coup happened in Ghana, and so it wasn't really safe for us to remain here. We became this immigrant family living first in Fresno, California, and then our travels took us later to Alabama in the South before returning to Ghana eventually in the early 90s. So I think that my multicultural upbringing influenced a lot of what I've become today. I am very curious about the world. I feel deeply about the need for an African Renaissance. I feel committed to being a part of that. I also have seen firsthand the impact of poor governance or bad governance. So I care deeply about the future of Africa. You know, it's estimated that by 2030, 1 out of every 3 poor person will be African. And I feel committed to wanting to do something about that. The demographics show that Africa has the youngest continent in the world. And in most African countries, women are the majority. So I feel also called to helping to uplift women and to help fill the future talent pipeline with women of purpose. And I think, you know, growing up as an immigrant, I know what it feels like to be othered or to be excluded. And I think I take it quite personally, this opportunity to work with women and girls and young people, helping them to just unlock the leadership potential we already possess. While studying at Ashesi, I ran for and became the first woman to become president of our campus student government. And it was an exciting accomplishment. I wasn't trying to prove a point, but it was reported that it was the first time in the history of Ghana that a woman had been elected to student council leadership at a university. And I think that's where my interest in women's leadership was galvanized. After a few moments of celebration, the reality dawned on me that actually that's not cool. how do I work to create a world in which women are normalized as leaders? So a lot of my career has been really spent looking at how to create environments where women and girls get supported when they raise their hand for public leadership. So Leading Ladies Network has been such a labor of love for me. The organization supports young girls that are in the school system, encouraging them to run for student government, as I did, because the statistics show that the earlier they engage, the more likely they'll continue into public leadership in the future, exposing them to different career paths, and really supporting with resources and networks that will enable them to continue the climb into public leadership. So I feel very proud of that work and very proud of the work that I've done in recent years to support women and young men as well entry into public service. I feel very committed to filling the future talent pipeline in the government sector, because after about 10 years of Leading Ladies Network, I realized that you can give women confidence, you can give them skills, you can connect them and plug them into networks that help them to rise. But some of what caps our ability to move forward is legislative, it's regulation, it's policy. So how do we get women and young people that are ordinarily overlooked, a seat at the table to make policies that really affect them? And how do we make Ghana and every other African country the type of place in which the ambitions of citizens are at the center of governance? Because at its best, governance really is about serving citizens and inspiring hope and creating an enabling environment where people can self-fulfill. But at its worst, we see that governance really steals hope and creates apathy. The latest Afrobarometer survey reports that across the continent, more than 60% of young people that were surveyed support military uprising to oust their current government. That's how dissatisfied young people feel about the promise unfulfilled in their respective countries. So I really have been trying to focus in my career, at least, on that nexus between creating leaders and influencing policy and creating the environment where leaders of purpose and competence and, with strong ethical standards can have space and have a voice in governance and in business particularly.
It's so great. It really is combining your passions, it sounds like, and for you to make a path for other women in particular to public service. It seems really unique too. And thinking about it for young girls, like you said, encouraging them to run for student council. Can you talk a little bit more about also, what this means for a young girl in education? Like, what type of education do they need to lead into the public service, or even just to be leaders in their community? Can you talk about a little bit of your work in access to quality education for young girls that I know you've been working on as well?
I feel really passionate about giving girls the opportunity to learn. I think education is one of the most important tools that any woman or girl today could have in her toolbox. I think the way and manner in which we educate girls really sets them up for success, or has the potential to set them up for success. So just stepping back, Ghana, Africa in general, culturally, I believe is in a place where there's a lot of evolution and revolution. We've seen a lot of advancements in technology and what people have access to contribute to their learning journeys. Let me put it that way. So I feel really passionate about helping girls, especially to leverage technology. So a lot of our work with Leading Ladies has been exposing young girls to STEM. We've got a robotics program that's ongoing in partnership with the Goethe Institute here in Accra, that's really helping adolescent girls understand the opportunity that exists in tech. I think being able to learn real world skills that will give young girls an edge in the job market is what we have been prioritizing, because education isn't really, or shouldn't just be, about knowing stuff and rote learning, like regurgitating stuff that you've learned in the pages of a book or from other sources. It really should be about application. Through our careers program, we're also exposing young girls to different career paths. And I think that is complementary in providing this architecture of support that really helps girls make the most of the educational opportunity. Because we know what the stats say, that when families are confronted with the choice of sending a girl or a boy in their household to school, many people are so economically pressured that they will choose the boy. Many families are also grappling, especially in this post-pandemic situation where economies are so constricted. We're seeing that girls have been disproportionately affected in terms of the teenage pregnancy rates. There's a district here in Ghana that we've had the opportunity to work with in terms of reproductive health and support to unwed mothers who are in the school system. And we say, why should they have to stop learning just because they're pregnant? Pregnancy doesn't stop their ability to learn. And leveraging digital resources and other really innovative approaches, how do we help them to navigate this journey in spite of an unplanned pregnancy? So I feel really strongly about not just the curriculum, but the architecture of support that one can create to enable girls meet this moment differently. Because I think a lot of women and girls who are in the school system have the level of exposure that will make it more likely that they will be future public leaders. And that's why we partner with schools, because we realize that the next ministers of state, the next presidents, the next chief justice, the next whoever, professional or public servant, will be found in a classroom today. And I think a lot of schools are beginning to wake up to that. We've been prioritizing public schools that are often under-resourced and don't really have career guidance programs, or don't really have the types of resources available to expose young girls to things like computers and robotics and other exciting things that are, right now at least, making a big difference in the girls in our program. I also think that there's something to be said about reaching girls when they are transitioning into adulthood. I know a lot of research has been done and a lot of writing's been done about the confidence gap that happens with young girls as they come into adolescence. And I think, although that's true, because as women are transitioning into as girls are transitioning into young women, that's where they're having those deep conversations with themselves about not just what they will do, but who they will be. And we have found that that's been so powerful to approach young girls at that age in conversations about leadership and about responsibility, and not from an approach of one day you will be leaders, but today you are a leader, and what you think matters, and how you act and how you engage with your government matters, and the choices you make today can set you up for a future that's different and better than what you experience today. I think that's been game-changing learning for us. And that really is a result of my own metamorphosis on this journey, that I think, as any social entrepreneur knows, you start an initiative with a clear idea and quite frankly, a notion that you're going to save a population. And much to your surprise, you realize that that population is teaching you more than you ever thought you would know. And in fact, also compelling you to consider new approaches that you didn't come to the table with. And one of the things that happened to me on this journey, I would say in probably year 5, was in engaging adolescent girls. I remember one session we asked, what do you feel, or what do you understand by the meaning of the word empowerment? And I feel like empowerment has become such a cliched word in many senses. And this 13-year-old girl raised up her hand and said to me, empowerment is the ability to make things happen. And I loved it. It just resonated with me and just, kind of taught me to go deeper, that it's not just these confidence building classes or these, technical, but it's how do we support people's ability to make things happen for themselves? It's about self-determination. It's about dignity. It's about helping people see themselves not as victims, but as change agents too. And I think a lot of the work that I see happening around the world that touches women, particularly in the global South, seems to be focused on amplifying their vulnerability. And there might be a usefulness in that, in getting people to care. But I think it can be destructive in making beneficiaries, or the people that you are called to serve, feel as though they do not have agency in and of themselves. And I think that flip of the switch for me has now permeated how we interact with the girls that we are so lucky to get to serve, which is, you are leaders now, not for the future, you are leaders now. And it was powerful to flip the switch on how they see themselves. For example, a lot of our young leaders come to Leading Ladies programs or club meetings with younger siblings in tow. Being able to shine a light to that and say, that's leadership too. You're responsible. Your leadership is showing up in your care for your family member. That's leadership too. You're already leading, and our job is to amplify that and give you new tools to amplify that in new spaces. And I think for myself as founder, for the team that supports this work, and also to the funders that we invite to partner with us, it's been meaningful to have that tweak in approach, because you can't convince women of their power if you are yourself not convinced they have any. And that's exactly what it is when you kind of look at them and use language to them and about their vulnerability. And it's been magical to see the lights get switched on in people's demeanor, the confidence to try, the courage to run. We've had many of our members run for office. We've had many of our members lead in companies. We've got entrepreneurs in this network. Over the nearly 15 years of this work, we have 12,000 women and girls who have been a part of this journey with us. And quite honestly, they've honored us by giving us the honor of being part of their unfolding success. And so I say all that to say, education is one piece of the pie. It's that architecture of support that you can provide that enables women and girls to see their own agency and in many ways unlock for themselves what success truly looks like.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it must be long-lasting, transformational, right? I mean, I feel like there are some programs, even in education, that even like a STEM one-off class that's teaching someone how to use technology. But this is fundamental, like you said, unlocking their power to lead and confidence. And I mean, it just is absolutely transformative. I mean, it's wonderful. And I love how you've really changed and flipped the switch, like you said, around how you're approaching this. So, and this is part of your Leading Ladies Network. Is there, you've talked a lot about it, but is there anything else you want to talk about for the Leading Ladies Network, or your book that just came out too, which, I'm thrilled, and we can put in the chat, a link to the book, but if you want to talk about that a little more, it's called The Leading Lady Way. So do you want to talk a little bit about your book or about the network?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. So, The Leading Lady Way is my second book. I wrote this book to do a couple of things. One, I wanted to document some of my learning from this social entrepreneurship journey. I wanted to tell a little bit more about why we do what we do, and to share some of the inspiration that has emerged over the years of serving women and girls in this capacity. We have members from 8 different African countries, and it's just been so enriching to me personally. But I also felt like putting together in the form of a book some of the learning was important at this moment. We're entering our 15th year as an organization, and in many ways in the midst of an organizational renewal. And I feel like as founder, it was time to kind of try to document some of why this emerged. It's my second book. The first book that I wrote was an attempt to, and every book that I've written so far, the two, has been an attempt to speak to what we were, or what I was experiencing or witnessing with women and girls that we were serving. So my first book, which I published in 2012, was really an embrace of where women I was interacting with in all of these different countries were. Tradition and religion, to a large extent, determines the path that most women's lives take in this part of the world. And I think it's true for Africa, and maybe true of most of the global South. And I think a lot of feminist thought and feminist organizations were somewhat dismissive of this really important pillars in women's lives. So I grew up Christian. I know what it's like to, be deeply embedded in a faith persuasion. But I also know, because I'm a global citizen, that not everyone will believe what I believe or subscribe to what I subscribe to. So, in Ghana, the statistics say that over 70% of our population practices Christianity, another 20-something percent practices Islam, and then the rest practice some form of traditional African religion. And it was very reflective of some of my interactions with the women and girls, very religious. And so it was, my first book was an attempt at taking a biblical passage that talks about women being powerful and upending or reversing a bad legislation. And it's an Old Testament story that I had hardly heard preached in any pulpit I'd ever been in, any church pulpit that I'd ever been. And so I felt like that was an important message to amplify. And it was so liberating to so many of the women that read it, because it was like, wow, someone who's finally not requiring me to park my religion somewhere, but also someone who is unpacking for me what is actually somewhat of a universal truth, that God wants everybody to be successful, including women. But that message wasn't always amplified from pulpits, because women weren't always in pulpits. So, my goal with the second book was to speak to what I felt I was witnessing, especially post-COVID, which is this deep sense of hopelessness and despair. And I don't want to blame it entirely on COVID, but I did see somewhat of a shift in these past 3 years, with more women, needing to be reminded of their worth and of their power, and being reminded that they are made for more, and that keep reaching for those highest ambitions. Don't keep those dreams on the back burner, and it's possible. And so I'm so thankful for how well it's been received, especially amongst our networks. I self-published these 2 books, and so a lot of this publicity has been very organic. And I speak to our groups, which again, I authored these books with these groups in mind. But as an author, I'm learning to listen and respond through my writing to what I'm seeing. I'm a person of trust for so many people, especially women. And just when I notice a commonality of theme, I try to galvanize my own thoughts around it to kind of speak to that. So I think the book is, I keep getting really great feedback about it, especially from women who felt like they were losing their way and needed to be reminded of their power. And similar to the first book, I felt like it was timely because too many people I was interacting with were feeling these things, and I didn't feel like there was anything I had read or come across that was speaking to it. And so I decided, like, why not I? So yeah, I really want to get the book into the hands of as many young girls and women around, especially the global South, as possible. And thank you for letting me talk about, my writings today. I really appreciate it.
That's great. No, thank you. And again, we'll put that information in Whova for anyone who's interested. So my next question is more, as you know, the theme of our conference is really looking at philanthropy and funding and the relationship funding has with programs in the Global South. So can you talk a little bit about the role of funders in your work, and maybe even if there are qualities or approaches of a funder that you would like other funders to use, or what has been a good relationship with a funder that you've had?
I have really been thankful for the people, organizations, and individuals mostly that have partnered with us. A lot of our work has been made possible through people who who see the value in what we're attempting to do. And some of the foundations that have supported us have approached us with, what you're doing, and we want to see how we can plug in. And I greatly appreciate that, because I think there does exist a different type of funder that is very or overly involved in the nitty-gritties of how the work is delivered. So let me explain. I'm a social entrepreneur from Ghana. I'm a woman. I'm proximate to the issue that I'm seeking to help solve. And I think that there's a fine line between advising and suggesting and dictating. And I've seen a lot of dictatorial funders. And on the one hand, I can appreciate how when you have financial resources, you want to be a good steward of those resources. But I have seen ridiculous amounts of hoops to jump over, and a lot of interference that I don't really think is helpful. So I think that perhaps leading ladies could be further along than we currently are if we were receptive to just any funder. But I think we've taken our time to cultivate relationship and to try to be as honest and as assertive with potential donors as potential donors seem to be with organizations. And we can't ignore that there's such a power differential that exists with a funder and a resource-starved NGO founder or NGO. And some of those gaps are also cultural. They're exposure gaps. They're things that get lost in translation. And I do see both sides of this, because I recognize that, a lot of the news that comes out about Africa is about corruption. And so there's a heightened sensitivity, I think, that funders feel when they're supporting work that's happening on the continent or in other, resource constrained areas. But I also think that there's a beauty um, in taking the approach of, you as the NGO working on the ground, you have access to intel that we will never have. And perhaps we should be asking you what needs to be done, as opposed to imposing on you what we'd like to see happen. Now, some of these funders have money earmarked for such a specific thing, and I've played the game before of trying to like reword what you're doing to fit their particular thing. And I found from experience that it doesn't work for anyone. You don't win. You're not living up to your specific goals. It doesn't feel pleasant or purposeful. And and so we've tried to adopt our model in many ways to make us less donor dependent, and I think that that's been very helpful. So our model currently is that the free work that we do with young girls in the school system, the free work that we do, especially in resource constrained communities, is really underwritten by some of the paid work that we do. So companies hire us to work with their high potential women, to design leadership curricula, and we work with a consortium of partners to deliver in this space of leadership development for companies that can pay. And so for companies who pay us, we say a portion of this earned revenue will help us support this work that we really exist to support. But that also means that our attention isn't fully focused on just those girls and just those resource constrained beneficiaries. And so there's always some sort of concession that you make with either approach. Do we, on the one hand, want to be, just we'll do whatever the funder wants as long as they keep sending the money, or do we want to find creative ways to earn our own money so we can, be a little more choosy? And we've so far been on the more choosy side. But as we think about what scale looks like, and we were on a board call a few days ago, just thinking about okay, we're about to enter our 15th year. What does scale really look like for us? Are we living up to the mission? And, we've been identifying force multipliers that have gone on to do different aspects of this work with us. And so should we be trying to do all of these things that we originally intended, or should we be seeking strategic partnerships? Should we be doing more of the paid work and less of this? Or for any founder, that this is the headache. Everyone comes to this fork in the road, and I'm at that fork in the road. So to funders that might be listening, I'd love to advise a couple of things. I think one, it's become quite posh right now to talk about localization and to support proximate leaders to deliver the work. And I think, everything that I'm reading these days seems to be reinforcing that. I think that's great, but it feels like more rhetoric than actuality right now. And I think to really invest boldly and courageously in proximate leaders takes a courage that a lot of organizations don't seem to be exhibiting right now. So I would encourage you to be courageous. I would encourage you to also listen more, because I think the statistics also demonstrate that founders that look like me are so over-mentored and under-supported financially. So Black women, especially in the NGO space, are burning out and also tapping out. The Great Resignation affected us so significantly, partly because we're dealing with other biases in addition to the, being from the global South and trying to, we're dealing with other biases. And almost at the same time, when our organizations are taking off. We're making babies. We've got aging parents. We've got burden of care for so many other things. And so when your financial commitment comes and all we can do with it is deliver a project, we can't cover overheads. We can't give long-term contracts to our staff. We can't do much else than deliver the project. It means we're working twice as hard and we're burning out quickly. And so that's why you see very few women leaders, especially from the global South, especially women of color, that have really built thriving enterprises, because we're fighting against so much in terms of cultural biases and trying to just be a woman in this context while trying to deliver meaningful, productive work. So the second piece of advice is just like the first. I think some of you will need to be more courageous in how you define support to organizations. I think support to organizations that doesn't include leadership support isn't really support at all, especially if it's in this type of cultural context in the global South. And I think you take for granted how much social safety nets cover founders that are from the first world, as they say, and how the lack of it here really burns women out to an extent that is many do not recover from. Then the last reflection I would give is that I think funders who are interested in Africa need to do more than just read the Western press to form their opinions about what's really happening here. I think in a previous role, we were excited about launching in a new country, and it was surprising to me how many members of that board were rubbishing the idea, mainly based on what they read in the New York Times or read in, like 2 other Western papers about that country and their specific situation. And it was different for me because I had been there, I spent extended time there, spoken to the right people, had a different telling of the story. And so I'm saying do more to get other sources of information. And there's a competitiveness that happens when you're in a resource constrained area. There's this, where did you lose me from? Do you recall?
It was just at the end, really talking about kind of the efficacy. And we only have a few minutes left, and definitely continue your thought. But I also, my last question that you can weave in, because we only have 2 or 3 minutes left. Okay. Tell me if you're optimistic about Ghana and the other countries in Africa that you've been working in, but you talked about this post-COVID, downturn. And you've been talking about the burnout, especially for women of color in the global South in this work. So are you optimistic, or is this going to be a hard road for several years?
Well, I feel very optimistic about Africa, and it's mainly because I still get to interact with young people, and I see the drive, I see the ambition. To have been part of these unfolding, journeys with leaders that are committed to the continent. I also feel like I am doing my part to get women and girls and young people interested in and serving in government and for public leaders.
Yeah, your connection is glitching a little bit, but we can hear. It's okay. We can hear the optimism in your voice, and as you said, that you get to work with these young girls and the optimism you have in the continent. We can hear that. So maybe other sentences.
Do you want me to take that answer?
Yeah. Why don't you finish your thought?
I feel really optimistic about Africa because I work with enough young people through Leading Ladies Network, through Ashesi University, through the Legacy Girls School, through Future Elect, I've worked with to get a sense of their energy, their commitment to the continent, their desire to see Africa really live up to its potential. So I know that by investing these,
I think we've lost you again, but we did hear a good chunk of that in terms of what you've said. And we're actually out of time, but this has been such a good conversation. So
okay.
thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for your
Oh,
work.
good.
We'll put more resources in Hoover.
Will you send me the
Yes, for sure. So
okay.
thank
Perfect.
you all for
Sure.
listening in. And again, we're if you're watching this, it's time
Thank
to
you.
move to the next session. So go into the Hoover agenda and click on the next session. That's the plenary panel. That's a changing role for funders. So thank you all, and we'll see you at the next session.